Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Tom Wells here. Today is Friday, March the 9th, 2018, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Your first daily dose of happy for the day. And it's been a good week, Tom. We've had a lot of interesting conversations, a lot of some challenging stuff that have been going on with some of the podcasts, but all really, really good and really interesting stuff. So we have our work cut out for us to try to keep that trend going today. We don't want to drop the baton, so to speak, here on Friday, right?
Yeah, right. No, we're going to keep it going.
I think we will, because you came up with an interesting topic. Of course, we've been doing a lot of Abraham books lately on the various podcasts. And so you thought, well, that's a good idea. Let's see if we can create a twist on it. You decided to start talking about Seth. And Seth is somebody that a lot of people don't necessarily know about. They may know about Abraham, but not so much about Seth, partly because Seth hasn't been channeled in over 30 years, I think. So,
yeah,
you know, it's been a little while, at least here in physical earthly terms. Maybe not so much in the non-physical.
Yeah, no kidding. Non-physical, it doesn't seem to matter.
Yeah, but before we get into that, how you doing? Anything exciting going on?
Yeah, I met a new friend through Facebook. That was cool. That somebody messaged me on Facebook who was
nice.
a new friend,
Yeah.
and so I got to get together with her for tea, and it turned out that we're really kindred spirits. So it's always nice to meet somebody that I can talk about the kind of things we talk about on the LOA Today podcast, that somebody in my community that I can get together and talk with about these things, because there isn't a lot of people that really get all this stuff and are just ready to launch into a conversation about it. And
True.
This woman was able to do that. And so I thought that was pretty cool. We're going to get together and have tea a few times. And then I also met a woman who's a psychic through a friend of mine in my comedy improv class, who has offered to do 3 sessions for me of her psychic healing, which I'm finding to be very interesting, because she's addressing some of the deeper issues in my psyche that I want to have addressed. And
Wow.
And it's all nonverbal stuff. So she does everything just by muscle testing and using different objects that she places around me. And she's receiving impulses from the unseen realm, and I'm really hopeful that it'll be really good stuff for me. So I'm just grateful for that.
Well, good. Those sound like nice little events going on.
How about you? Is any big wins or anything exciting?
Probably the biggest one is what I told Wendy about during yesterday afternoon's podcast, which is that the list of niggly things have disappeared, and that's the word for the week, niggly. But the niggly list is done. Hooray, hooray.
Yeah.
So, yeah, now I'm going to get back to working on editing the book. That poor book has been put on the back burner for so long. It's been like 2 weeks since I looked at the darn thing, and I started to make good progress while I was editing it. So I'm kind of hopeful that I do have actually one person I have to meet shortly after the podcast, but then after that, I'm going to be working on the book until the afternoon podcast with Wendy, and then all of tomorrow, my wife is headed off to Rhode Island to meet with some friends that she's known since school days. And so that's going to be more opportunity for me to just sit quietly and continue to do some editing and hopefully get this book closer and closer to the finishing point. I mean, I really want to get the editing done in the next few days so we can start thinking about when is this thing going to publication, which is what we really want, you know?
Well, you're doing it in record time according to my standards of how long a book would take to put together, and especially an anthology of that many people. That's a lot of editing in my mind, and getting it all right and then having it actually ready to publish. I think you're on a great, amazing timeline.
It's funny how we perceive things differently, all of us, because you're right. I mean, Cindy and Wendy have both previously participated in these kinds of books. Joel, of course, has written a book, and he's in the process, I think, of writing 4 other books all at the same time. But that's just mind-blowing to think about that one. But, you know, we have a little experience here with book writing, and almost everybody has told me that you're pretty aggressive here, Walt, in terms of how fast you're trying to get this done. And from my perspective, it can't get done fast enough. So it's all relative to what your perspective is. About the only one who probably would agree more with me is Joel, just because of how quickly he cranks stuff out. But other than that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
No, I love it because you just go for it. And, to you, it's not an obstacle. You just see like, oh, yeah, I can do this really quickly. So,
well, I do have an advantage. The advantage that two advantages, actually. The first advantage is I have previously written a book. It was a novel that I wrote about 10 years ago.
That does help.
So that helps a lot. And the other advantage is I've actually done a lot of editing for people over the years. And to be perfectly honest, editing of some really lousy writing about some really boring subjects. And you do enough of that, and you just feel good about it after a while. You feel like, yeah, I'm good at this stuff. I can actually take something that is terrible and turn it into something halfway decent. I can't make it great because you have to have material to work with, but I can turn it into something that's readable, and you can actually, maybe not enjoy it, but you can get through it. And,
Well,
and
good.
if it's really good material, I can turn it into something really enjoyable. So, when you have that kind of experience, you say, okay, well, an anthology doesn't seem all that big. But I can see from the perspective of somebody who's never done it before, yeah, that would be huge. That would be a gigantic undertaking because it seems like it's a huge amount of work. It actually isn't so bad, but it seems like. It's kind of like the old elephant adage, right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time?
Yeah, one bite at a time.
Well, that's what you do with editing.
You've got a lot of skills. Yeah, you've got a lot of skills, I think, and that some people don't have. You're really great at the computer, and which is really good. So you don't have any blocks there, and then you're really good at editing, and like you say, you've done it before. So
yeah, it definitely helps. There's no doubt about that. It helps a lot, but I'll be glad when we got past this stage. I'm already thinking about what it's like when it's already published. There's a movie that came out last year that was I think it got a couple of Oscars. The movie was called Hidden Figures, the story of the three African American women who participated in NASA during the space program's early days and so forth. Really good movie, by the way, for anyone who hasn't seen it. And in the movie, one of the scenes shows the director of, I can't remember what he was the director of, but he was like the main director of the project there. And he says, in my mind, we're already at the moon. In other words, they're trying to get John Glenn into space for the first time. And in his mind, they've already broken through all those barriers that they have for that, and they've already put themselves out into the moon. So in his mind, they're already there. Well, that's where I am with the book. In my mind, I'm already there. The book is already written. It's just a question of publishing it. Now, has it actually been edited yet? No, but that's not the way I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about let's plow through this editing. This is no big deal.
Yeah, well, it's the main law of attraction thinking, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Work with the end in mind, and as if it's already a done deal.
As if it's already a done deal. That's it.
So the more you can believe that and just relax and accept that, then things can come a lot easier.
Now, how similar is what Abraham teaches to what Seth teaches? Are they completely on different topics, or how much overlap is there between them?
Well, interestingly, before Esther and Jerry got into channeling Abraham, my understanding is that they were into Seth quite a bit. I think they actually met with Jane Roberts, from what I've heard.
No, the story I heard is that they wanted to, but when they tried to reach out to find her, they found that she had just passed.
Oh, okay.
So they never actually had the experience of meeting with her. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's the reason I wanted to use it in the podcast is because it fits right in with where my leading edge of my personal growth is going right now, which is to understand more about how we are a infinite being in a physical body than we are a physical body. And, a lot of people that Seth talks a bit about that. That's actually a lot of what this introduction is focusing on, is how much we need to change our perspective from there. And I realize in our society, there, certainly the way I was raised, most of us were raised, was more with the paradigm, the overlying assumption that we are physical beings. And this is the overlying assumption, is we are infinite beings in physical bodies. And from that perspective, they are taking a look at reality and everything that we call reality. And I love that, to look more from that perspective, because I find that's what's up for me in my life right now, is making that paradigm shift. And it is actually a big shift. So at least that's what this part talks about. And I don't know. I guess you can just decide by listening how much you think it sounds like Abraham. I think it's quite different in certain ways. This particular part is very fundamental. This is the beginning of sort of laying the groundwork. So some of it will sound like, oh, well, I know that stuff already. But if you listen closely, I think you'll find that Seth is talking from a pretty cool place.
So let's make sure we've made it clear. What's the name of the book now?
Okay, the book is The Nature of Personal Reality.
Okay.
Specific practical techniques for solving everyday problems and enriching the life you know. And this book was channeled, according to Seth and Jane Roberts, because she was sounds the way like she was getting inundated with people wanting to have personal sessions with her as she started to channel this entity called Seth, because they realized, this was in the 1970s, that this was such rare, amazing insights that she was projecting and channeling, that they wanted personal sessions with her, and she was getting inundated with those requests. And Seth decided to channel this book through her so people could have a practical way to deal with their everyday problems that they were coming to her with.
And we're going to start from the perspective of Sting, which is that we are spirits in a material world. That's the perspective of the book.
Yeah, it really is. We are, and it's the basic message of Abraham. We're not at the mercy of our subconscious or helpless before forces we cannot understand. We're given the ability to form our experience as our thoughts and feelings become actualized. So it's basically how we create our own reality. But, there's a lot to talk about how we're a multidimensional personality, and that it's a miracle that we're, here in this physical being creating these lifetimes. So, but they're saying don't make a division between the physical and the spiritual.
Okay.
So that to me is the fascinating part, how much they focus on not, about how we're creating this reality. So from the infinite perspective, how are we creating this experience we're having? And they talk about that, which I think is fascinating.
All right. So can you give us a taste? What does it sound like? What do they talk about?
Well, I've divided the section today into 3 portions, and each portion is going to take between 6 and 10 minutes to read. So they're not that long. So please bear with me as I'm reading, because if it sounds at all boring, it'll be over soon.
Well,
and then Walton,
if you hear me, take your time, and if you hear me snoring, then you'll know that it needs to go a little bit faster. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, but I think it's pretty good stuff. But it is keep in mind that this is the preface and the introduction, the first chapter. So it is laying a groundwork for things where Seth gets more and more sophisticated or more into it as time goes on. So it begins, good evening. We will call this evening's essay The Manufacture of Personal Reality. Experience is the product of the mind, the spirit, conscious thoughts and feelings, and unconscious thoughts and feelings. These together form the reality that you know. You are hardly at the mercy of a reality, therefore, that exists apart from yourself or is thrust upon you. You are so intimately connected with the physical events composing your life experience that often you cannot distinguish between the seemingly material occurrences and the thoughts, expectations, and desires that give them birth. If there are strongly negative characteristics present in your most intimate thoughts, if these actually form bars between you and a more full life, still you often look through the bars, not seeing them. Until they are recognized, they are impediments. Even obstacles have a reason for being. If they are your own, then it's up to you to recognize them and to discover the circumstances behind their existence. Your conscious thoughts can be great clues in uncovering such obstructions. You are not nearly as familiar with your own thoughts as you may imagine. They can escape from you like water through your fingers, carrying with them vital nutrients that spread across the landscape of your psyche, and all too often carrying sludge and mud that clog up the channels of experience and creativity. An examination of your conscious thoughts will tell you much about the state of your inner mind, your intentions and expectations, and will often lead you to a direct confrontation with challenges and problems. Your thoughts, studied, will let you see where you are going. They point clearly to the nature of physical events. What exists physically exists first in thought and feeling. There is no other rule. You have the conscious mind for a good reason. You are not at the mercy of unconscious drives, unless you consciously acquiesce to them. Your present feelings and expectations can always be used to check your progress. If you do not like your experience, then you must change the nature of your conscious thoughts and expectations. You must alter the kind of messages that you're sending through your thoughts to your body, to friends and associates. Each thought has a result in your terms. The same kind of thought habitually repeated will seem to have a more or less permanent effect. If you like the effect, then you seldom examine the thought. If you find yourself assailed by physical difficulties, however, you begin to wonder what's wrong. Sometimes you blame others, your own background, or a previous life if you accept reincarnation. You may hold God or the devil responsible, or you may simply say that's life and accept the negative experience as a necessary portion of your lot. You may finally come to a half understanding of the nature of reality and wail, I believe I've caused these ill effects, but I find myself unable to reverse them. If this is the case, then regardless of what you have told yourself thus far, you still do not believe that you are the creator of your own experience. As soon as you recognize this fact, you can begin at once to alter those conditions that cause you dismay or dissatisfaction. No one forces you to think in any particular manner. In the past, you may have learned to consider things pessimistically. You may believe that pessimism is more realistic than optimism. Excuse me. You may suppose, and many do, that sorrow is ennobling, a sign of deep spiritualism, a mark of apartness, a necessary mental garb of saints and poets. Nothing could be further from the truth. All consciousness has within it the deep abiding impetus to use its abilities fully, to expand its capacities, to venture joyfully beyond the seeming barriers of its own experience. The very consciousness within the smallest molecules cry out against any ideas of limitation. They yearn toward new forms and experiences. Even atoms then constantly seek to join in new organizations of structure and meaning. They do this instinctively. Man has been endowed and has endowed himself with a conscious mind to direct the nature, shape, and form of his creations. All deep aspirations and unconscious motivations, all unspoken drives rise up for the approval or disapproval of the conscious mind and await its direction. Only when it abdicates its functions does it allow itself to become swayed by negative experience. Only when it refuses responsibility does it finally find itself at the seeming mercy of events over which it appears to have no control. Now, books on positive thinking alone, while sometimes beneficial, usually do not take into consideration the habitual nature of negative feelings, aggressions, or repressions. Often these are merely swept under the rug. The authors instead tell you to be positive, be compassionate and strong and optimistic and filled with joy and enthusiasm, without telling you what to do to get out of the predicament you may be in, and without understanding the vicious circle that may seem to entrap you. Such books, again, while sometimes of value, do not explain how thoughts and emotions cause reality. They do not take into consideration the multidimensional aspects of the self, or the fact that ultimately each personality, while following definite general laws, must still find or follow his or her own way of adapting to these personal circumstances. If you are in poor health, you can remedy it. If your personal relationships are unsatisfactory, you can change them for the better. If you are in poverty, you can instead find yourself surrounded by abundance. Whether you realize it or not, you have pursued your present course with determination, using many resources for ends and reasons that at one time made sense to you. You may say, poor health makes no sense to me, or a fractured relationship with my mate is hardly what I was after, or I certainly have not been pursuing poverty after all my hard work. If you were born poor or born sick, then it certainly seems to you that these circumstances were thrust upon you. Yet they were not. And to some extent or another, they can be changed for the better. This does not mean that effort is not required in determination. It does mean that you are not powerless to change events, and that each of you, regardless of your position, status, circumstances, or physical condition, is in control of your own personal experience. You see and feel what you expect to see and feel. The world as you know it is a picture of your expectations. The world, as the race of man knows it, is the materialization in mass of your individual expectations. As children come from your physical tissues, so is the world your joint creation. I am writing this book to help each individual solve his or her own personal problems. I hope to do this by showing you exactly the way in which you form your own reality, by explaining the ways in which you can alter it to your advantage. The existence of so-called negative thoughts and feelings will not be glossed over, but neither will your ability to handle these, period, for they are quite under your control. There are methods of using these as springboards for creativity. At no time will you be told to repress them or ignore them. You will be shown how to recognize those within your experience, to discover which of them has been allowed to run away with you, and how to manage those that seem to be beyond your control. The methods that I will outline demand concentration and effort. They will also challenge you and bring into your life expansion and alterations of consciousness of a most rewarding nature. I am not a physical personality. Basically, however, neither are you. Your experience now is physical. You are a creator, translating your expectations into physical form. The world is meant to serve as a reference point. The exterior experience is a replica of your inner desire. You can change your personal world. You do change it without knowing it. You have only to use your ability consciously to examine the nature of your thoughts and feelings and project those with which you basically agree. They coalesce into the events with which you are so intimately familiar. I hope to teach you methods that will allow you to understand the nature of your own reality and to point a way that will let you change that reality in whatever way you choose. This book will explain how personal reality is formed, with great stress laid upon the ways of changing unfavorable aspects of individual experience. It will hopefully avoid the Pollyanna attributes of many self-help books and tease the reader into an enthusiastic desire to understand the characteristics of reality, if only to solve his or her own problems. The methods given will be highly practical, workable, and within the abilities of any person genuinely concerned with those problems inherent in the nature of human existence. The point will be made that all healings are the result of the acceptance of one basic fact, that matter is formed by those inner qualities that give it vitality, that structure follows expectation, that matter at any time can be completely changed by the activation of the creative faculties inherent in all consciousness. So that's the end of the preface.
Okay, so as you were talking, a few things came to my mind. The first one I want to suggest is I can see how Seth communicates. I can see the way Seth structures thought. And basically what you read there was a series of thoughts that had connection. The thing that I think is a little bit tricky for somebody who's listening, because I'm in that listening seat right now, is the thoughts are not presented linearly like we're used to, like with a human author. So there's a little bit of a jumping around that goes on there. And because of that, I'm thinking we should probably work through these things one section at a time, one piece at a time, so that when we get to a new thought, we stop, we talk about the thought that was just discussed, and then we go on to the new thought. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty hard to talk about this thing.
Well, I will say one thing that I noticed in these three sections that I suggested I could read today. They do build like I'm anxious to get to the next section because you immediately see what he's talking about. And as he goes into the next section, then he's explaining the nature of your personal reality and how it's created by us. And then you go, oh, okay, I see. Now this is where he's going.
I understand that. I'm just saying that for the purpose of the podcast, because the listeners can't read the book, they can't see it.
Exactly.
So they're dependent upon how we're presenting it to them. So I'm thinking let's work through it a little bit more slowly and give ourselves a time, and then that way the listeners can keep up too. Because I mean I'm usually pretty good at this, and even I was having trouble kind of keeping up with where they were going with it. Now there were a couple thoughts that came through that were interesting. One that I don't remember the wording, but it was something like thoughts drip through our fingers. In other words, the idea that we have these thoughts that are just kind of spilling out almost without our awareness and our recognition. Yeah. And that's something I've noticed before. I can't remember Abraham ever saying that, but that's actually something that I think is true for us when we are in the earliest stages of learning how to become deliberate creators. So I thought it was interesting that they mentioned that, because I think that is true. What we're really trying to learn to do is to marshal our own control, our own personal discipline, if you will, over our thought process. And early on, it becomes pretty evident we're not disciplined at all. We're flabby conditioned.
Well, I would like to lend also to what you're saying is incredibly true for me, that I so often find that in all the last 4 or 5 years I've been studying Abraham so religiously, I have found that the biggest obstacle to me is the degree to which I don't really notice what I'm saying to myself. And I'm getting better and better at it every day. And yet it's still wonder, where are my blind spots? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes it's the thoughts that are so quiet. They're so subtle. They're almost like my thought body or something, that I've been living in for so long that it's almost like an attitude. It almost feels more like an attitude or a feeling or a mood that I live my life in. And yet if I ask myself, why would I not be getting a result in a certain area of my life that I want? And I realize it's my vibration, then I realize it's because I'm really not that aware that my vibration is not up to speed with what I would like to be attracting into my life.
Yeah, one of the ways that they said that, and again, I'm paraphrasing because I couldn't write it down fast enough, but something to the effect that if I recognize that it's me who's doing my own blocking, that I'm blocking myself, what it means is that I still haven't accepted myself as a conscious creator. I thought, well, there's a really interesting idea, because from my perspective, I would have thought that the fact that I'm recognizing that I'm blocking implies that there's a recognition of conscious creation as me being at least a potential conscious creator. And they're saying, nope, you haven't got it at all yet. Okay.
I found that to be the most interesting thing about the preface, was when they said that because it dawned on me in the same way that you just described it for yourself, and yet I don't feel I even fully grasp what they were saying, and luckily that'll be unfolded more as we read. But yes, I agree with you. I can't even put it into words.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I guess I can kind of see it, because certainly if I'm simply saying, well, I can see that I have a block here, the fact that I've recognized the block is a good thing. It's an improvement, if you will. It's a step forward. But it doesn't actually prove that I am consciously creating. It actually, now that I think about it, it does show that any creating I've been doing has been unconscious. Otherwise, I wouldn't be putting blocks in my own way. And
the degree to which I have had to listen to Abraham over and over and over again, and they give program after program, and I've listened to hundreds of hours, and I ask myself, why is that? And I realize it's because it's taking me that much to let this stuff sink in.
Yeah.
Because in a way, they're saying the same thing over and over in a whole bunch of different ways.
Oh, they do, yeah.
But why does it take us to hear it so many ways, so many times, when it seems like, oh, I can do what they're saying, and oh, good, I'll change my whole life? Well, it hasn't gone that way for me. I mean, massive things have shifted, which I'm so grateful for. It's been incredible over the last number of years, but I'm still on the journey of literally understanding how I'm sabotaging myself sometimes with my thoughts. And I like the fact that in the preface here, they say, we're going to look at that. How are you having these various thoughts that are still telling yourself that you are stuck in your limitations or your lack?
And what can you do about it? Because they pretty strongly imply they're going to show us what to do about it.
That's one thing I like. See, I haven't read this book yet. I'm just starting it. I've only read the parts that I'm now reading to you.
Mm-hmm. And I have to agree with them about their criticisms of positive thinking books, especially from the era in which this was written, 1970s, 1980s. They were all about the positive side. There was very little discussion about what you do about the negative side. That is actually very, very true. Now, Abraham, of course, Abraham comes after Seth in terms of chronology, And what Abraham has done has been to address a lot of the stuff related to, well, how do you deal with the negative side? But they're right. For that era, most of the stuff that came out in that time was fluffy in that sense. In the sense that it didn't actually address, well, what do you do about the negative thoughts? The predominant answer was, we'll think the positive thoughts, which is true. But when you're stuck in the negative thoughts, it doesn't help a whole lot. You got to have a better strategy than that. I mean, yes, you end up having to think positive thoughts in order to get out of it, but you have to do it. You have to get into it and approach it in a way that works for where we are as physical human beings. Even if we are spirits living in a material world, we're in a material world. We deal with the material world. We feel the material world. We experience it. So we have to make the change within that context. Otherwise, it really doesn't make sense to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that this stuff that they say how they focus so much how we are creators, translating our expectations into physical form, and that the world is here to serve as a reference point to our being a creator. Isn't that, to me, that's a fascinating way to put it.
I'll also be interested to see how, or rather, not how, to what degree they define terms and concepts. One of the things that I think that Abraham has done well is to block out what individual concepts are and how to understand them. For instance, the idea of what deliberate creation is, what the law of attraction is, what it means to be somebody who focuses on the wrong thing and not realizing it. What are the implications of how long that you think about it? They break it down into pieces like that so that we can understand it as physical, limited physical beings. Because in our physical thinking, we are limited by every measure I've ever heard compared to our non-physical side. Well, it's important for us to be able to handle it. We have to be able to eat it one bite at a time. Give us 5 or 6 mouthfuls at once, we'll probably choke to death. So we can't do that.
Yeah, and the thing that it's awakening within me, and you'll see in this next section, is the experience of my looking at this from the eyes of my infinite self instead of from the eyes of my physical self.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
so
that's a really helpful thing.
So let's get into the next section, and of course this time we'll try to do it in little pieces. So as one thought comes out, then we'll stop. We'll say, okay, so what are they talking about?
Okay, yeah, and you just interject it if you want to stop me.
Okay. Well, you too. I mean, you can also stop too when you because you can see what's coming up next. So if you see that the thought process is changing, then you say,
well,
okay,
there's every single one of these things is just fascinating that we could talk about it at length. But to continue to read, sometimes Seth explains it. They continue to explain it. So we'll just see how it goes.
Okay.
This is chapter 1. It's called the living picture of the world. The living picture of the world grows within the mind. The world as it appears to you is like a three-dimensional painting in which each individual takes a hand. Each color, each line that appears within it has first been painted within a mind, and only then does it materialize without.
It's the first time that they start to hint at the idea that thoughts create things. They hinted at during the preface, but they hinted at it in a broader way here.
Yeah, and now they just go at it all over like.
Right.
In this case, however, the artists themselves are a portion of the painting and appear within it. There is no effect in the exterior world that does not spring from an inner source. There is no motion that does not first occur within the mind. The great creativity of consciousness is your heritage. It does not belong to mankind alone, however. Each living being possesses it, and the living world consists of a spontaneous cooperation that exists between the smallest and the highest, the greatest and the lowly, between the atoms and the molecules and the conscious reasoning mind. All manner of insects, birds, and beasts cooperate in this venture, producing the natural environment. This is as normal and as inevitable as the fact that your breath causes a mist to form on glass if you breathe upon it. All consciousness creates the world, rising out of feeling tone. Feeling tone. It is a natural product of what your consciousness is. Feelings and emotions emerge into reality in certain specific ways. thoughts appear growing on a bed already laid. The seasons spring up, formed by ancient feeling tones, having deep and abiding rhythms. They are the result again of innate creative aspects that are a portion of all life.
So they've emphasized feeling tones a couple times now. So that sounds like a pretty important phrase. So feeling tone. What would a feeling tone be? I mean, if you and I had to define a feeling tone, what's a feeling tone?
Well, interestingly, when I was studying shamanism for a number of years, it came upon very clear to me, and I may have mentioned it in previous podcasts, that there's a lot of ancient myths, world creation myths that come from a lot of different indigenous cultures that say that the world, the entire world and all of creation is being sung into existence, that everything is really created by tones and sound waves, you might say. And so somehow on this level of the infinite creation, that we are ourselves are gods creating what we're experiencing, we're doing it through tone, and that tone is felt within us.
So we're talking specifically about audible tone as opposed to, say, visual tone or textural tone.
I think it could be any kind of a feeling tone.
Because, I mean, you could have color tones, right? You could have different tones of brown or different tones of yellow or red or green. So does that apply also?
But my understanding, the way the different indigenous cultures speak of it in their myths and in their stories is that it's a song. It's a song that sings everything into existence. You know, for example, there's Native American myths that believe that whales and dolphins carry these tones and these sounds, and they know the entire Akashic records of all of the world, and they carry it in their songs. But that literally Seth goes on to explain how reality is created by these feeling tones, literally creating, life itself. So flesh is created by tones, and it comes upon our bodies. We begin to see it. We see it and experience it based on these tones vibrating it into reality. So you might say it's a feeling vibration.
Maybe that's what tone is the equivalent of. Abraham talks a lot about vibration. Maybe what they're really talking about is tone as vibration of any kind, not just sound vibration.
Yes, they might be.
All right.
And they say, like, for example, the seasons happen because of deep ancient rhythms and tones that cause the seasons to continue to repeat.
And by the way, you used a term, too, that we need to define just in case listeners don't know. Akashic records?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that much about it, but according to, I believe, Vedic scriptures of India that go back many thousands of years, the Akashic records, and forgive me if I don't define this properly, but they are the ways that all of the patterns and experiences of all of this earth and all of humanity it's almost like the vortex. It's where all knowing is contained, already completed in the Akashic records. So
would it be fair to describe it as like a spiritual Wikipedia?
Well, all of the past, present, and future already is a done deal in the Akashic records, in my understanding.
Oh, I see. So it includes future
sort of
as well.
Like it's sort of like in quantum physics terms, it's the all that exists in the Akashic records, but you could literally go there and read your entire past and your entire future is there. And it all exists simultaneously because it's beyond time and space. And Seth talks a lot about this place, this experience that's beyond time and space. In fact, in this very readings of today, they get into this stuff.
Well, before we get to that, let me ask you, based on what little you've experienced of it, because you said you've had at least some reading or hearing or something like that tells you what this is about. Is it your understanding that Akashic records are not just about the future, but that the future is kind of written in stone, or is it malleable?
Everything's malleable.
Okay.
The entire past is malleable.
I see. Okay. So the whole thing is it. Got it. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So go ahead.
These ancient aspects lie now deeply buried in the psyches of all species. And from them, the individual patterns, the specific blueprints for new differentiations emerge. The body of the earth can be said to have its own soul or mind, whichever term you prefer. Using this analogy, the mountains and the oceans, the valleys and the rivers, and all natural phenomena spring from the earth's soul, as all events and all manufactured objects appear from the inner mind or soul of mankind.
So they're promoting the idea of Gaia, basically.
Yeah, that everything is consciously alive, mm-hmm. and everything that you see and experience that we call mountains and oceans and valleys and rivers are all springing from this consciousness of the earth. And and they go on to say the inner world of each man and woman is connected with the inner world of the earth. The spirit becomes flesh. Part of each individual soul then is intimately connected with what we call the world soul or the soul of the earth. The smallest blade of grass or flower is aware of this connection and without reasoning comprehends its position, its uniqueness, and its source of vitality. The atoms and molecules that compose all objects, whether it be the body of a person, a table, a stone, or a frog, know the great passive thrust of creativity that lies beneath their own existence and upon which their individuality floats, distinct, clear, and unassailable. So does the human individual rise up in victorious distinctiveness from the ancient and yet ever new fountains of its own soul. The self rises from unknowing into knowing, constantly surprising itself. As you read these sentences, for example, some of your knowledge is conscious knowing and instantly available. Some is unconscious, but even the unconscious knowing is knowing in its own unknowing.
That's the kind of thing that flips your mind around. Even the unconscious knowing is knowing in its unknowing. Like, what the bleep did they just say?
Yeah. Well, what they're saying is that, in my understanding, is that we are this infinite being that is playing a game with itself in a way. In its the fact that there is total consciousness within us, but that we don't always recognize it, because of that's what they go on to explain. What I love about all this stuff is it explains why do we put ourselves on this earth into this realm where we have amnesia about how much we actually know if we're infinite beings.
Yeah, I've often wondered that myself. In fact, I often ask myself, are we like mentally deranged? Why would we do that to ourselves?
Well, the next paragraph says, you always know what you're doing, even when you do not realize it. Your eye knows it sees, though it cannot see itself except through the use of reflection. In the same way, the world as you see it is a reflection of what you are, a reflection not in glass, but in three-dimensional reality. You project your thoughts, feelings, and expectations outward, then you perceive them as the outside reality. When it seems to you that others are observing you, you are observing yourself from the standpoint of your own projections.
So they were kind of hinting at what Abraham says more directly about the connection between what they call you and you, meaning you, your inner being, and you, your outer physical being. They're hinting at that connection.
Yeah, and I think they're explaining it to me in a more graphic way than Abraham does. In other words, they're saying that everything that you see is a reflection that you're projecting outward. And that's something that I find to be really cool because, and luckily they keep on explaining it so that you can see how I can see how I'm constantly the source of everything, that it's all coming from within me outward, that there is no outer reality. Everything is a hologram. Everything is, we project everything that we think and feel into this world, and therefore we see the chair and the table and the other person, but it's all a projection from us. Each one of us is a little universe creativity. We're each a creator, a God, as you might put it, who's creating the external reality we're seeing.
Which is in and of itself a fairly revolutionary thought.
Yes, that's why I like this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty revolutionary because it's essentially saying, no, that pen that I'm holding in my hand here, that pen is only there because I'm projecting that it's there, because I'm in some way through my thoughts making that pen be there. It's not objectively there in its own sense. And that's pretty revolutionary, particularly for the 70s and 80s. Because in that time, objectivity was big. It was really huge then. Today, it's still fairly big, but not as big as it was then. Yeah. That would have been like, I was not so much a follower, but I had read extensively the works of Ayn Rand, who was all about objectivity. Her whole thing was, the entire world is only best understood in terms of objectivity. And here comes Seth saying, objectivity is all an illusion. Yeah, they would have done well together.
Yeah, right. Well, and anywhere you go today, if you say to anyone that everything that you're experiencing, even that person that is looking back at you, is a creation of your own projection, that, to me, it's incredibly empowering, this stuff, because it puts it into my court, every experience in my reality. And it's incredibly freeing because it makes me realize, well, I have so much more control than I think I do. And these guys that do out-of-body travel that I'm starting to study, they are saying that the second you're out of your body, you realize that you're creating everything with your thoughts. You're creating everything with your thoughts.
And this is the part that's a little bit spooky, because it isn't just conscious thoughts. It's thoughts that I'm not even aware I'm having.
Mm-hmm. And that's why becoming more and more aware of who we are as creators, as infinite beings, then we become more and more aware of the thoughts that are creating what we're experiencing. But yes, we are. I've ordered these other books by Rupert Sheldrake, a professor from Cambridge University, who is so controversial because his work is about how there's these morphic fields that are created that are like these things they talk about, these ancient fields. Like they say, we create our reality on a bed of reality. So like in a way, we're projecting onto other morphic fields of others' projected realities. So then it gets like, oh, okay, so this is really multidimensional. We're tied into multiple dimensions. So at the same time as I'm creating everything that I'm projecting out there, I'm projecting into other fields. And they say this is saying every creature on the earth is doing this. Every rock, every tree, every atom, every molecule, every salamander, every eagle is projecting its own preferences outward. And all these fields we're interacting with.
That's creating it's one of the things that create kind of a little mind block, so to speak, because okay, those fields are everybody's perspective. Everybody's looking at stuff and they're thinking stuff into existence onto each other's fields, and it creates, the first impression it creates in my mind is that everything gets muddied, and then the second thought that occurs to me is maybe instead of muddied, maybe they're like different colored pieces of glass, and you overlap them, it creates new colors and so forth. Maybe it's some combination of them. All I know is that if you have all of these thought processes creating stuff at the same time in the same relative place, that's a bit confusing trying to figure out, how do you separate them? Where are the threads? You can't really see the threads. We can see what the final result is. We all see the planet, right? We see the world around us. We see, the pens and the computers and the notebooks and the tables and chairs and everything else. But the threads that put all that together the way they're describing, that's where the mind starts to boggle.
Yeah, I think it's good that the mind boggles in a way for me, because I don't want to be able to really totally understand that my reality is all subject to reasoning. I want to be living more in a spontaneous place of creating. And I think the recognition of why we feel our lives are so limited by illness and lack of money and lack of relationships we want and we struggle because we don't understand how powerful we are as creators. And I feel like a lot of Abraham's work, they're constantly trying to get us to understand how powerful we are as creators and not to feel that we're so limited. And so they go round and round and explaining how we create our own reality. And this is just, to me, giving me more ammunition, more depth into understanding how I'm a creator. And the beauty to me of so much of it all is that the energy that keeps the planets spinning in perfect proximity to each other, that energy of creating worlds, is actually the energy that's synchronizing everything. So if you look at crop circles or you look at sacred geometry and you see all these amazing shapes like the triangle and the cube and the circle and all these other shapes, the octagon and the pentagon and everything, you realize there's an underlying order to everything. And there's an underlying order that's so magnificent and so beautiful that it literally creates all the beauty that we experience in the world. And we can trust that order to not feel fear that we're going to be lost in the sea of thoughts and impressions, even though sometimes we feel that way.
It's interesting that you describe it that way for a couple of reasons to me. One reason is that it really does illustrate for me how we all have very different perspectives. Even when there seems to be similarities, there are very different perspectives. For instance, you kind of waxed poetic there about, the sacred shapes and all that kind of stuff, and how you were not terribly interested perhaps in how the different fields overlap. You were much more interested in this other stuff. And for me, it's diametrically the opposite. Now, we're both pursuing the same thing, right? We're both looking at the same topic. We're looking at the same thing. We're both interested in it. We both want to explore it. And yet our approaches are completely different perspectives. Well, if there's a better example of showing how different perspectives we really have, I don't know what it is. It's a great example.
Well, that's true. And yet I have a feeling that if we continue this discussion for the next hour or 2 hours or however long, we would find that we're actually both interested in the same thing and we both are seeing the same things. I'm probably as much seeing what you're talking about and how, it brings up for you the confusing overlap of all these morphic fields, you might say, or all these projections. You're projecting your reality out. I'm projecting my reality out. But if we continued to talk, we would probably find that, I see that your way and you see it my way. Mm-hmm. At least I believe that.
Yeah, I think so. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to have conversations. It wouldn't work.
Well, and actually, I actually believe it's what's needed in American politics, for example, is if there was enough real discussions with conscious beings, that's assuming that everyone is conscious.
I love the way you said that.
Well, it's like anybody could argue that you could maybe talk to certain politicians all day long and you're never going to meet eye to eye on anything.
Because they're not conscious.
Well, they are conscious, but they're on such a different track.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, my opinion is if we were to take this kind of approach and apply it in politics would disappear.
Yeah, well, I think that's very possible. I would totally agree.
So anyway, we've diverged enough.
We've got a page and a half left. Should I try to read it, or we have only got about 6 minutes left?
I don't think we can do a page and a half in 6 minutes, but why don't we do a paragraph or two, and we'll just mark it and pick it up again on Monday.
Okay. Well, it says, you are the living picture of yourself. You project what you think you are outward into flesh. Your feelings, your conscious and your unconscious thoughts all alter and form what you call your physical image. This is fairly easy for you to understand. It's not as easy, however, to realize that your feelings and thoughts form your exterior experience in the same way, or that the events that appear to happen to you are initiated by you within your mental and psychic inner environment. Your body does not just happen to be thin or fat, tall or short, healthy or ill. These characteristics are mental and are thrust outward by you upon your image. I do not mean to be facetious, but you were not born yesterday. Your soul was not born yesterday. In those terms, but before the annals of time, as you think of time. The characteristics that were yours at birth were yours for a reason. Your inner self chose them. to a large extent, the inner self can even now alter many of them. You did not arrive at birth without a history. Your individuality was always latent within your soul, and the history that is a part of you is written within unconscious memory that resides not only within your psyche, but is faithfully decoded in your genes and chromosomes and fulfilled in the blood that rushes through your veins.
They're describing something here that is pretty all-pervasive. I mean,
yeah.
This is like, this is the same kind of thing that Abraham has talked about, but obviously this is a different perspective, and this different perspective is really trying to make it clear that the kinds of things Abraham talks about happen in ways and in places and parts of our bodies and our experience and our lives that go well beyond what many of us have learned so far. I mean, we've made some progress, those of us who study law of attraction, and we've learned quite a bit, but they're describing how it infuses everything. I mean, truly, a law of the universe, I guess, infuses everything, but they're really showing how it infuses everything. It's like,
yes, I think so.
Yeah.
That's the mind-blowing thing, you know, and that's just, this is like I say, the thing I'm most hungry and thirsty for is knowing how is it that all this is happening here? If it's a hologram, if it's all an illusion, if it's,
well, it's more than a hologram, obviously. It's because a hologram, as we understand it, is basically a light projection in a controlled field, and so we see images in that light projection. That's actually a rather crude metaphor for what's really going on. What's really going on is actually much more magnificent than that, because not only is it holographic, but it has texture, it has smell, it has sight, it has sound, it has feeling. It has all these aspects to it that a hologram can't possibly provide, and yet there it is.
And each fragment of the hologram, if you break it down, contains the whole within it. So from each fragment of a hologram, you can produce a brand new thing. It's like a stem cell or something like that.
It's fractal then.
Yeah, like I think when you what?
It's fractal then.
Right, it's fractal. And I think, you know, that I've actually heard from some psychics who see things that we don't see, you know, that are in the unseen realm, but they see them.
Yeah.
They say one way that it shows up a lot of times is as fractals. They see fractals, and they realize that they see things morphing into fractals that we would call a tree or a desk. You know, they see them morph into fractals, and someone was saying, a psychic I was reading recently said they think that the whole universe might just be fractals that are morphing constantly into different things that then we're interpreting as.
And for those who don't know what we're talking about, fractals, a fractal is a mathematical concept where you have a certain calculation that you do, and then you repeat it on the result, and then you take that result and repeat it again, and you just reiterate like that over and over again. And when you do that and turn it into a graphic form, what you end up with is things like leaves from an oak tree looking like the shape of the oak tree, and you see, you know, small pieces of it and big pieces. It's all over nature when you start applying this thing. It's a kind of a crazy thing. Look up fractals. Do a Google on fractals, fractals, and you'll find some pretty wacky stuff. Unfortunately, we got to kind of stop there because we're out of time. But this is fascinating, and I think we've got the right formula. So let's go forward next week, and one little bit at a time. We'll eat the elephant one bite at a time, because we eat too much, man. We just choke to death. It's not good.
Okay.
But this has been great. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be talking on Monday.
Yeah, you too.
Oh, and by the way, I almost forgot. How do people reach out to you if they're looking for a little personal assistance?
Well, I have a website called youarejoy, youarejoy.com, and they can anyone who wants to can have a free coaching session with me and decide if working with me as a coach would be helpful for you.
Outstanding.
There's a page there that you can sign up for that free session.
So there you go. Excellent. Tom, it's been great. We'll talk on Monday.
Thank you, Walt.
All right. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.